Metaphysical poetry is a result of a type of rebellion against the 16th century sonnet sequence. This type of poetry avoids all the set rules that are made by the Elizabethan poets. The writers who wrote these poems were seen as radicals because they didn't want to play by the rules, they wanted to make their own. This kind of poetry was made for more intellectual people, or the type of people who will read between the lines because of the use of conceits and complex ideas that these types of poems will contain. The language used in metaphysical poetry is simpler and easier to read compared to a sonnet. Also, it avoids a smooth flow, which makes every line unique. John Donne is seen as the father of this type of poetry. He's the person that you'll first think of when asked about metaphysical poetry. He is very good at using his metaphysical conceits. For example, in one of his poems, he compares a man's tears to a newly minted coin. One would think how these two elements are similar, but once you read the rest of the poem, you begin to think and make connections between the two, which is the purpose of these metaphysical poems, to make you think beyond what's written down. Metaphysical poetry comes from a group of 17th century poets called the Metaphysical Poets, as mentioned by an English poet and critic named Samuel Johnson. This group of poets all had a similar writing style, although they are said to have never met or were a formal group. This group of poets include John Donne, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, Edward Herbert, Thomas Carew, Richard Crashaw, Andrew Marvell, Richard Lovelace, and Sir John Suckling. This type of poetry focuses on love, life, and reality. These poems are all lyric poems, which means they are brief but full of intensity. Also, they use irony, metaphors, symbols, and unique wordplay. The comparison of two different objects in metaphysical poems is another unique aspect to the type of poetry. A lot of the time, the poets will use objects that do not connect to each other in any way, but find a way to connect them. This leaves the reader interested and engaged in the poems. John Donne is seen as one of the most influential members of the metaphysical poets. He was a poet, satirist, lawyer, and a clerk in the Church of England. He is noted for his poems about love and religion, also his use of language and metaphors. His poems share similar characteristics such as paradoxes, irony, abrupt beginnings, and dislocations. He is particularly famous for his use and understanding of metaphysical conceits. Metaphysical conceits are metaphors that are unusual and draw similarities between two unlikely objects. An example of metaphysical poetry is the poem A Valediction, Forbidden Morning by John Donne. In this poem, he paints the reader a picture of a compass used for drawing circles. The one arm of the compass represents the lover that is always moving around, while the other arm, that is the supporting arm, represents the other lover. The circles represent perfection and eternity, which are two things that people strive for in love. The metaphor of the compass that represents the two lovers shows that without the balance of the two, you cannot have a precise, perfect circle. Here are our takes on a couple of metaphysical poems that we chose. The first one is A Fever by John Donne. Oh, do not die, for I shall hate all women so. When thou art gone, that thee I shall not celebrate, when I remember thou wast one. But yet thou canst not die, I know. To leave this world behind is death. But when thou from this world wilt go, the whole world vapors with thy breath. Or if, when thou, the world's soul, ghost, it stay, 'tis but thy carcass then, the fairest woman, but thy ghost, but corrupt worms, the worthiest men. O wrangling schools, that search what fire shall burn this world, had none the wit unto this knowledge to aspire, that this her fever might be it? And yet she cannot waste by this, nor long bear this torturing wrong, for much corruption needful is, to feel such a fever long. These burning fits but meters be, whose matter in thee is soon spent. Thy beauty and all parts which are thee are unchangeable firmament. Yet 'twas of my mind seizing thee, though it in thee cannot persever, for I had rather owner be of thee 1 hour than all else ever. And here's my analysis.
Next up, we have The Flea by John Donne. Mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee, and in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said, a sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swells with one blood made of two. And this, alas, is more than we would do. Oh stay, 3 lives in one flea spare, where we almost, yea, more than married are. This flea is you and I, and this, our marriage bed, and marriage temple is. Thou parents grudge, and you were met, and cloistered in these living walls of jet. Thou use make you apt to kill me, let not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege 3 sins in killing 3. Cruel and sudden hast thou sense, purpled thy nail in blood of innocence? Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphst, and say'st that thou find'st not thyself, nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true, then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor when thou yield'st to me will waste as this flea's death took life from thee.
Metaphysical poetry was the foundation of many poems that we read to this day. The poets that invented this movement created it in such a way that one must delve deeper into the poem rather than just what's written on the paper to extract the meaning. Poetry was redefined with the use of exaggerated metaphors known as conceits, and because of its success in English literature, it is still used in modern poetry.